This is Kirteop, presenting 100 discoveries beneath deserts that changed our view of the ancient world. Egyptian towers. When people think of ancient Egyptian houses, most imagine low huts made of mud brick. Excavations in Emet from the northern delta radically changed this picture. Archaeologists uncovered a district from the late period, an entire street of tower houses, 4 to 5 stories high, forming a dense wall along the processional road to the Temple of Wadje. The height is estimated at 12 to 15 meters, which for the 7th century BC is equivalent to a modern 5-story building. The lower levels are packed with grain silos and beer towers. Above are living rooms with narrow chimneys. Higher up there are covered terraces where date pits and bronze sisters of the goddess Hathor have been preserved. In the evening, people didn't just have dinner here, but held rituals with music. 5 steps from the doors, a limestone promenade leads to the temple of Wadjet. The slabs are polished so well that even today they reflect the setting sun. And the cult columns stand exactly where the craftsmen of the 7th century BC placed them. It's like a real mini Memphis in the province. Dense high-rise buildings, a market, a temple, and a sacred road, all in one cramped block. 3 repair layers in the masonry show that the towers lasted at least a century and a half. And on the facades, you can still see reliefs with Harpocrates and a green faience Ushabti. It's a sign that religion and everyday life literally shared the same wall here. And Matt breaks the old stereotype about single-story Egypt. This has been preserved for 20 million years. In the mid-19th century, farmers in Sioux County, Nebraska, began to notice strange things right in their fields. Stone spirals were sticking out of the ground, spirals twisted perfectly like a corkscrew, as thick as a human arm and some taller than a person. No one understood what they were or where they came from, and pretty quickly people started calling them devil's corkscrews, because there just wasn't any reasonable explanation. In 1891, a scientist finally arrived to study them, the geologist Erwin Barber. He examined the samples and found out that the spirals were actually fossils. The sand-filled tubes with fibrous walls were clearly of biological origin, but he couldn't figure out exactly what they were. The first theory was that they were giant freshwater sponges. This theory seemed logical right up until geologists noticed that the rock surrounding the corkscrews didn't look anything like the bottom of an ancient lake. It looked more like a dry steppe. Barber switched to the theory about fossilized plants, but then everyone noticed the bones. Inside the spirals were the bones of small rodents. And even in the Cretaceous period, plants didn't drag rodents inside themselves. In 1993, 2 scientists independently came to the same conclusion. These were burrows. Ancient burrows that filled with sand and fossilized. Barber didn't give up and said that the shape was too perfect for some animal's dwelling, that no animal digs so perfectly. In the end, the argument was settled by scratches on the inner walls, claw marks that someone left when the ground was still soft and wet. In 1905, the culprit was identified. It turned out to be Paleocastor, an ancient beaver about the size of a marmot, who lived here 20 million years ago, with short tails, small ears, and incredibly long front teeth that grew quickly so they wouldn't wear down from constant digging. The animal braced its hind legs on the axis and screwed itself into the ground, creating the perfect spiral. At a depth of about a meter, the burrow widened into side chambers for sleeping and raising the young. Sometimes there were separate recesses, which scientists believe were toilets or containers for water. The spiral entrance protected them from predators, as a paw can easily reach into a straight burrow, but not a twisted one. Paleocastors vanished when Earth's climate became dry and hot, and the forests gave way to endless plains, but their burrows still stick out of the hills in Nebraska National Park, 22 million years later, with a shape so perfect that a world-renowned geologist couldn't figure out what it was for 40 years. Surrounded by 2 goddesses. In 1908, archaeologists made a stunning discovery, a 4,500-year-old statue of Pharaoh Menkaure, hidden in the sands of Giza. These statues have been preserved in almost perfect condition, demonstrating the highest skill of ancient Egyptian sculptors. Menkaure was not just a ruler, but the builder of one of the Great Pyramids. And here he is depicted surrounded by 2 goddesses. To the left of the pharaoh stands Hathor, the goddess of love, motherhood, and the sky, symbolizing protection and divine patronage. On the right is a female figure representing one of Egypt's regions, representing one of the nomes or regions of Egypt, emphasizing the importance of the king as the unifier of the country. These compositions not only glorified the pharaoh, but also emphasized his connection with the gods. The sculptures of Menkaure are some of the most impressive examples of ancient Egyptian art. They lift the veil on the past, allowing us to see how the Egyptians perceived power, divinity, and royal grandeur. The Oxfordshire mirror. Today, a mirror is a common object, but in ancient times it was considered a magical artifact. Before you is a bronze Celtic mirror found in Didcot, England. It was created in the 1st century BC and is one of 18 similar finds that have survived to this day. In the Iron Age, such items were incredibly rare, and they belonged only to a select few, possibly priests or noble women. But what was it used for? For beauty, rituals, or maybe for communicating with another world? In ancient cultures, mirrors were often considered portals to an otherworldly reality. And perhaps this mirror was one too. It also played its role in shamanic rituals. Decorated with elegant patterns, this artifact remains one of the most mysterious discoveries in Britain. Its true purpose is lost to time. But who knows? Maybe it really held something more than just a reflection. A cache with royal regalia. An unexpected discovery in the crypts of Vilnius Cathedral shocked historians. A carefully sealed vault was discovered, containing burial regalia associated with the rulers of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland. There, they found crowns, scepters, chains, rings, and plaques that belonged to King Alexander, his mother Elisaveta Habsburg, and Barbara Radziwill, the wife of Zygmunt August. These items were not worn during their lifetimes. They were made specifically for burial ceremonies. According to researchers, the regalia were first discovered back in 1931. But with the start of World War II, they were hidden deeper in the catacombs and sealed up to protect them from being looted. The location of this hiding place eluded archaeologists for decades, until December 2024, when they conducted a detailed examination of all the cavities using an endoscope, comparing archival diagrams with new plans of the cathedral. As a result, the treasures were found. Barbara Radziwill, whose tragic fate became legendary, died soon after her coronation, which made her burial regalia especially significant for her contemporaries. The Mass from Homs. The Syrian city of Homs is located 162 kilometers south of Damascus and is one of the oldest in the Middle East. During the early Christian era, outstanding metalworking masters lived here who created a unique silver mask. In biblical times, Homs was known as Kadesh, and in Roman times as Emesa. There was a huge temple of the sun god Elgabal here, called Elagabalus in Latin and Heliogabalus in Greek. Emesa was ruled by priest-kings throughout the existence of the Roman Empire, and one of its notable residents became an emperor. His name was Heliogabal. At the start of the 20th century, archaeologists in Homs uncovered the remains of an ancient temple and found an impressive artifact crafted by locals, a warrior's helmet mask. Its uniqueness lies in the fact that the mask, which completely covers the face, imitates the appearance of a real person who once lived. The mask is made from solid sheets of silver with slits left for the eyes. A laurel half-crown is fixed above the forehead. With 2 hinges at the ears, the warrior could lift the mask above his face if needed. Archaeologists believe the helmet was made in the 1st century. There are many theories about who it might have belonged to. Since ornamental patterns are embossed on the back of the helmet liner, it can be assumed that the owner of this item was quite wealthy, and the helmet was needed not so much for participating in battles as to display his status. Judging by the time it was made, the owner of such a mask helmet could have been a member of the Homs nobility. This is indicated by the features of his appearance. He is a relatively young man with a large aristocratic nose and a commanding chin. His face is frozen in indifference, with a slightly disdainful expression, like someone who knows the value of human weaknesses and passions. Undoubtedly, this man had military training and had participated in battles, but at the same time, he tried to protect his face from injuries and damage. The mythical giant, the Cardiff Giant, a supposed petrified man 3 meters tall, was discovered in 1869 by workers digging a well in Cardiff, New York. The giant was actually a hoax made from a block of gypsum. It was brought to a farm in Cardiff, where it was buried for a year before being discovered by the workers. The idea to create the giant belonged to George Hall, who wanted to prove the gullibility of the public and take advantage of people's religious belief in giant humans mentioned in the Bible. After the giant was found, it became the subject of mass attention, and viewers paid for the opportunity to see it. The famous showman Barnum offered to buy the giant, but was refused. Then he created his own copy and claimed that his version was genuine, and the original was a fake. In 1870, both giants were recognized as fakes, but the Cardiff giant went down in history as one of the greatest hoaxes of the 19th century. A 500-year-old ship with gold. Namibian diamond miners stumbled upon the wreckage of a 500-year-old ship in the desert near the coast. The Portuguese ship Bom Jesus disappeared in 1533 on its way to India. Found under a very thick layer of sand, the ship rested at the site of an ancient man-made sea lagoon, which has now turned into a salt lake. Gold and silver coins were found in the hold, as well as numerous elephant tusks. The total value of the cargo is estimated at more than $13 million. The ship was found by diamond miners after one of the salt lakes near the Skeleton Coast was drained. From time to time, ships have been discovered in these places, but the Portuguese cargo ship is the oldest of all those found, and the only one whose cargo is of such value. The items found on the ship, with a spatula for scale, an astrolabe in the center, a frying pan, and some clay pottery. The items are well preserved, prayer beads and a Portuguese silver coin. The Namibian government will claim the treasure found on the ship for itself. This is standard practice when sunken ships are discovered near the coast. If a ship sailed under the flag of a certain country, the valuables found in it must be handed over to its successor. However, in this case, the government of Portugal very generously waived this right. This model gives us an idea of what Bom Jesus might have looked like during its voyage to India back in 1533. A place that causes hallucinations. In Khakassia, in the south of Russia, in the mountain range of the Kuznetsk-Alatau, there are caves that the locals call the gates to the underworld. And it's not just a beautiful name because shamans have used it as a place for sacrifices for the past 2,000 years. Animal bones, remains of campfires, soot on the walls, and piles of human bones in vertical shafts, 20 meters deep, were found here. And all of this is documented. What started as a legend turned into a truly eerie discovery. In 1985, a scientific expedition descended there. Speleologist Konstantin Bakulin, a man with many years of experience and dozens of difficult expeditions, described it like this: "My legs suddenly felt weak. I was gripped by panic. And in front of him appeared the figure of an elderly man in flowing clothes and a horned hat with burning eyes, who beckoned him deeper into the grotto. Bakulin reached for the safety rope. He was pulled up, and he was never able to go down again. After him, several other scientists told similar stories, one of whom recalled how his colleagues dropped their equipment and ran to the exit, pushing each other aside. Although none of them could explain exactly what happened there, all the speleologists and scientists who have been there say that if you stay there for too long, you might lose your mind. The locals avoid it because they're afraid. Scientists installed magnetometers inside and found out that periodically, a pulse with exactly the same amplitude of 1000 NT appears in the cave. And according to neuroscientists, it is exactly this kind of low-frequency radiation that causes anxiety, disorientation, and hallucinations in people. When the pulse appeared, the bats and pigeons at the entrance lost their orientation and began to fly around chaotically. So it's not just a matter of imagination. There was indeed a scientific explanation for such behavior. The source of this pulse was never found. There are no generators under the cave. Geologists suggest it might be a fault in the Earth's crust, but for now, that's just a hypothesis. Following the study's publication, numerous theories began to surface. Some claimed it was a forgotten military radar, an alien ship that keeps sending a distress signal, or a portal between worlds. The white shaman seen in the cave is most likely a hallucination caused by this radiation. Most likely. But the scientists who explained this never returned to the cave. If you remember how shamans chose places for their rituals, they always looked for something special. Caves with unusual acoustics, where even a quiet sound spreads throughout the space. Places where the earth itself does something to your mind. Plants that change perception and immerse you in an altered state of consciousness. In Kashkulek, this radiation causes hallucinations even in experienced scientists with equipment. Now imagine what happened to a shaman who came here intentionally in the dark after several days of fasting. He got exactly what he came for. He just didn't know it was physics, not spirits. Eggs of 3 types of creatures. In the Brazilian state of São Paulo, a very interesting place was discovered back in 2004, but serious excavations only began in 2021. And here's what they found there. 3 clutches of eggs. They are between 66 and 105 million years old. That is, from the time of the dinosaurs. The first clutch had 15 eggs, the second had 21, and the third had 47 eggs. 47 eggs in one clutch. Nothing like this has ever been found anywhere in the world in the entire history of paleontology. The eggs belong to crocodilomorphs, an ancient group of reptiles that are ancestors of modern crocodiles, with an ellipsoid shape and blunt ends. The shell thickness ranges from 0.3 to 0.8 mm. The high porosity indicates that the eggs developed in a humid, swampy environment. Most interesting is the location, not the eggs. All 3 clutches were found in the same geological layer, meaning they were laid simultaneously, and they are arranged in a way that indicates colonial nesting. Next to the crocodile morph clutches, traces of nests of predatory theropod dinosaurs and ancient birds were found. Multiple reptile species nested here simultaneously. Imagine a swamp 100 million years ago. In one place, literally just a few meters apart, crocodilian reptiles, predatory dinosaurs, and the first birds are laying their eggs at the same time. Completely different creatures that, in another situation, would simply eat each other. But here, each is busy with its own nest and doesn't bother its neighbor. Scientists still don't understand why this particular place attracted them all together. Maybe it's the special temperature of the soil. Maybe it's something else. But the fact is, this was something like a common maternity ward for several species at once. And this place lay untouched in the ground for 100 million years until they finally started to excavate it. The flesh of the fish god. In the cliffs of Bandagara lives the Dogon people. Once every 60 years they hold the Sigi festival. The main ritual is to carry out the huge Nomo mask. According to legend, Nomo was an amphibian. Once it arrived in a copper egg, rumbling like thunder, fell into a lake, and came out of the capsule half human, half fish. Nomo showed people star maps. It said, "Next to the bright Sirius there is another dark and very heavy star." Astronomers discovered this white dwarf, Sirius B, only in the 19th century, but the Dogons spoke about it long before telescopes existed. So that his lesson would not be forgotten, Nomo, according to the myth, shared his flesh, giving people pieces of his skin as sacred food. That is why the Dogons still call his power Nyamya Nomu, the life inside the fish god. They keep long tablets with a pair of stars in secret sanctuaries. Scientists still cannot understand whether this knowledge is ancient or a later hint from missionaries. But the Dogons themselves are sure that the copper egg really did come and will return one day when the time for the next Sigi arrives. The history of UFOs is always a mix of fear, technology, and myths. Let's keep that in mind and move on. A piece of metal worth $65,000. Pay attention to what you find in your backyard. 12 years ago, a farmer in Norfolk, United Kingdom, dug up an old bronze piece of metal in his backyard that looked like a bent sword. The farmer felt sorry to throw this thing away, so for 12 years, he used it as a doorstop in his barn. He was just about to finally get rid of the piece of metal, but something made him take a photo of the bronze object and send it to archaeology experts. And what do you think happened? It turned out to be a 27-inch ceremonial sword that's about 3,500 years old. It has exceptional scientific value. It was used for making sacrifices to the gods, and then it was sacrificed itself, which is why it was actually bent. This is the 6th sword of its kind in all of Europe that has survived to this day. In the end, the UK's National Heritage Fund bought the piece of iron from the farmer for $65,000 after a year of negotiations. Pyramid of an ancient civilization. The Norte Chico culture, also known as Corral Supi, is considered one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations of the Andes. It existed about 5,000 years ago and achieved significant advances in architecture, agriculture, and social organization. Recently, archaeologists discovered a pyramid structure about a kilometer from the sacred city of Corral Sup in the Supe Valley, Peru. The structure is a quadrangular building with a wide staircase leading to the top. Its walls are decorated with massive vertical stones called huancas, which may have had not only a structural, but also a ritual significance. In addition to the pyramid, researchers found 12 public and ceremonial buildings located around the central square, which covers almost 39 hectares. This indicates the existence of a small urban center with administrative and religious functions. 3 platforms have been identified in the pyramid, which indicates a complex architectural tradition of the Corral civilization. At the Chupa Chupatsi Garo site, archaeologists also discovered a unique geoglyph made in the Sechin style. It depicts a human profile and is probably associated with rituals reflecting access to the region's marine and agricultural resources. The Barabar Caves in India. The Barabar Hills are rocky formations consisting of a cluster of huge boulders. It is said that the rock they are made of is gneiss, a metamorphic rock related to granite. 3 out of the 4 caves are carved into a single rock, oriented from west to east. At one time, large annual fairs were held here, attracting thousands of pilgrims. The Karan Chopar Cave is located on the northern side of the rock and dates back to around 244 BC. An inscription on the entrance wall states that it was donated to the Ajivika sect in the 19th year of Ashoka's reign. The cave is a rectangular chamber measuring 10.2 meters in length, 4.2 meters in width, and 3.2 meters in height. When the curb is viewed in close-up, traces of a high-tech tool can be seen. The walls of the cave are polished. The polishing was done very carefully and with great skill. If you look at the entrance from deep inside the cave, you can appreciate the quality of the polishing. The cave is very dark as there is only one source of light, the entrance. And in the polished walls of the portal, the surrounding landscape is reflected like in a mirror. On the southern side of the cliff, there are 2 caves, the western one and Sudama. It is divided into 2 parts, a rectangular chamber and a round room. The walls, floors, and ceiling are polished with great skill. On the left end, the caves have a semicircular shape with a dome. In the middle, there is a trapezoidal entrance cut into the round room. Official historians claim that the round room is made in the form of a straw hut, where the first Buddhists held their gatherings, and thus the prototype of the hut was embodied in stone. I wouldn't want to call this room a resonator since there is no direct evidence yet of it being used as a resonator. The surfaces of this room are also polished. Imperial purple in children's graves. This is a story I didn't plan to include until I realized how much it changes the way we thought about the Roman Empire. York, United Kingdom, May 2nd, 2025. York is one of the main Roman cities in Britain. The remains of Roman walls and gates still stand there. There are a lot of excavations there. Archaeologists are studying Roman infant burials. Such finds are regularly discovered in Britain. This was a well-known tradition of that era. It's routine work. But in these particular burials, traces of fabric were found, and when the fabric was analyzed, it turned out to be Tyrian purple, the very same imperial dye that in the Roman Empire was literally worth more than gold. A single cloak could cost a fortune. It was extracted from special sea mollusks. And to get enough dye for a single cloak, thousands of these mollusks had to be processed. Purple was worn only by emperors and the highest-ranking aristocrats. According to some sources, wearing it without permission was considered equivalent to treason. And here is this purple on the burial shroud of an infant in provincial York. Let's think about what that could have meant. On one hand, there were people in York of such high status that they could afford to bury their children in fabric worn by the emperor himself. That would mean that provincial York was much more important in the imperial hierarchy than we thought. On the other hand, there was a tradition in Rome that we know almost nothing about, a special attitude toward deceased children, some kind of ritual specifically associated with imperial purple. Neither of these versions fits with what we think we know about the Roman Empire. And that makes the discovery especially valuable, because it suggests that we are missing something in the history of ancient Egypt. Let's break down what Tyrian purple is, because without this, the scale of the discovery is unclear. Tyrian purple is not just an expensive fabric. To put it into perspective, 1 gram of this dye cost more than the average annual income of an ordinary Roman citizen. This was literally the most expensive substance in the Roman Empire. The law directly restricted who had the right to wear it. And here is this fabric found in children's graves in a British provincial town. What amazes me isn't the fabric itself, but how it completely changes Rome's history. 2,000 years of study, thousands of books, hundreds of films, and then you find purple on children's bones in York, and you realize that you don't understand anything. Houses dug into the ground. If you drive along the road past the Tunisian village of Matmata, you won't see much from the outside. Flat land, sparse bushes, a few unremarkable buildings on the surface. But if you approach one of the round courtyards right in the ground, you find yourself above an inhabited crater 80 meters deep. This is a Berber house, only it doesn't stand on the ground. It's dug beneath it. The Berbers first dig a round pit in the ground. This will be the future inner courtyard. Along its perimeter, they carve out side rooms directly into the walls. Sometimes several of these craters are connected by underground corridors, and an entire neighborhood ends up hidden beneath the surface of the earth. On the outside, it's empty, but inside, there's a whole world. The Berbers have built these dwellings for over 1,000 years for a simple reason. Underground temperatures stay stable. While it's 40 degrees above ground in summer, it's 18 to 20 degrees in the underground rooms. No air conditioners or electricity bills. The Matmata Plateau is located at the only land corridor between Libya and Tunisia, and for centuries, armies of conquerors have passed through it. The Berbers first escaped them by going into the mountains. Then they moved down to the plains. But they never forgot how to build homes from the top down. This is not poverty or backwardness. This is a 1,000-year-old engineering idea that works better than any modern air conditioner. In 1977, George Lucas's film crew came here. The underground hotel City Driss became Luke Skywalker's home on the planet Tatooine. Lucas saw exactly what he was looking for in these crater-like courtyards, a place that looks like another world, because it looks like no other place on Earth. Today, tourists come here for photos with the Star Wars sign. Local residents still live in nearby underground houses, which their ancestors dug 1,000 years ago to escape heat and invaders, not for the movies. And they live in them for the very same reason today. And also, a historic butterfly. Imagine a public restroom that's 250 million years old, northwest Argentina. The rock is covered with fossilized piles left by ancient Decenodonts, herbivores the size of a hippopotamus. Scientists break open one of these coprolites, expecting to find only plant mush. But under the microscope, iridescent microscopic scales shimmer, tiny plates that today cover the wings of butterflies and moths. There are almost 100 of them, and each one fits perfectly into the structure of modern lepidopterans. The layer is 247 million years old. That's 46 million years older than all known butterfly fossils. That means the first nocturnal flyers were already fluttering over prehistoric forests. At that time, there were no flowers or beetle pollinators on land yet. The species will be named Ampatiri eloise. It's named after a young researcher who described the discovery but died of cancer. A tiny scale bridges a huge gap between the molecular clock of evolution and the fossil record. Let me remind you that even in droppings, there are keys to the bigger story. The golden artifacts in the Tuva Valley of the Kings have been declassified. Back in 2019, dozens of ancient gold ornaments were discovered in the so-called Valley of the Kings in Tuva. Archaeologists kept the find secret after discovering gold items during excavation of the Tunugwan burial mound in the Valley of the Kings. Noble Scythians were once buried here. The finds were identified as the material heritage of the nomadic Uyuk culture. Among the most significant finds is a rich burial inventory discovered in the grave of a woman who died at the age of 25 to 30. The grave dates back to the period between the 1st and 4th centuries AD. We found the remains of a wooden coffin and 65 gold items, including a unique spiral made of gold foil that was used for the burial ritual. Besides the gold ornaments, bronze Chinese mirrors, and other intriguing items, were also found in the burial mound. As the head of the archaeological expedition, Timur Sadikov, noted, the Kokol culture left behind special structures of various types, so each new discovery helps to fill certain scientific gaps. The magical lamp from Jerusalem. The Pilgrim's Road, or the Stepped Road, is the main street of Jerusalem from the time of the Second Temple. In the 1st century AD, crowds of religious tourists from all over Judea flowed along it to the Temple Mount. But in the year 70, the Romans destroyed both the temple and all of Jerusalem along with it. The ruins were leveled. The new city, Aelia Capitolina, was built right on top of them. Now there are already 5 meters of such rubble above the Pilgrim's Road, and on top of that there are Arab quarters, like a roof. But Israeli archaeologists have dug a tunnel to the ancient street, and over the past 10 years, they've already explored 200 meters of it. That's a third of the estimated total length of 600 meters. In early May 2021, in these underground passages, they found a small oil lamp, a grotesque bearded face made of bronze, or more precisely, the left half of a face. The lamp was made in the early 2nd century. Researchers suggest that it was buried at that time during some kind of ritual at the foundation of a massive house, which was built over the Pilgrim's Road after the destruction of Jerusalem. In 2012, during excavations in Roman Aquincum, which is modern-day Budapest, archaeologist Gabor Lasani discovered an amazing bronze lamp in the shape of a Roman theatrical mask, the right part of it, in the lower part of a building. The mask halves from Jerusalem and Budapest are identical in size. The Hungarian one has a connecting groove, while the Israeli one has a protrusion of the same shape. And it's very difficult to make 2 items so precisely in different places. It's quite likely that these lamp halves were made in the same workshop, or maybe they're even 2 parts of the same lamp. So what? Well, that's basically it. Archaeologists are now struggling to come up with a way to connect the 2 halves for study during the pandemic and yet another Israeli-Palestinian war. I'm sure they'll figure it out. Dozens of articles will be written, maybe even a book and a couple of doctoral dissertations, but no one will ever be able to say for sure what story is hidden behind these bronze halves. We just don't have the technology for that. Maybe it's the sign of a construction corporation from Aquincum that was building an administrative building in Aelia Capitolina under a government contract. Maybe it's the password of a spy network that operated throughout the Roman Empire, or it's a marker left by a secret society of alien descendants. That's entirely possible, but we'll never know. Over 100,000 years old, researchers continue to uncover the mysteries of our evolution. Now, having discovered unusual footprints that are 115,000 years old in the northern part of Saudi Arabia, the tracks preserved in a former mud pit in the middle of the Nafud Desert amazed scientists because they appeared in a place where such ancient human footprints were not expected to be found. According to estimates, these footprints belong to early representatives of Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals, which confirms the migration routes of human ancestors in changing climate conditions. Thanks to a remarkable combination of factors, the absence of strong winds and the peculiarities of the local climate, the structure of the footprints remained almost intact, allowing scientists to accurately date them and reconstruct the scene of a brief stop by ancient people at Lake Alatar during a dry period. This place seems to have served as a rest and watering point rather than a permanent settlement, as indicated by the absence of traces of tools or hunting. Some scientists believe that these footprints fit into the general migration route along which Homo sapiens moved from Africa to Eurasia. New discoveries are changing our view of migration routes and vividly demonstrate how nature is capable of carefully preserving the chronicle of life. Deep man-made caves. In 1992, a resident of the Chinese village of Xi'an named Wu Anan was convinced that the pond next to his house was man-made. Although local legend said that it had no bottom and you shouldn't go near it, he bought a pump, convinced several neighbors to help him, and they started pumping out the water for 17 days in a row until an entrance to a huge man-made cave was discovered underground. Then another one and another, and in the end, there were 24 caves under the village, carved out by hand more than 2,000 years ago. Ancient and primitive are not the same thing, but synonyms. The fact that it was ancient doesn't mean they didn't have the technology to achieve all this. Each one is about the size of a football field, with a ceiling as high as a 9-story building. The walls are covered with parallel grooves. All of them are the same depth, the same angle, the same distance between them. Clearly, someone did this intentionally. But there's one odd thing that archaeologists noticed. The exact same pattern was found on ancient pottery from this same area, over 2,000 years old. Someone deliberately copied the ornament from the pottery onto the stone walls. Who did this and why? No one knows to this day. People extracted about 1 million cubic meters of stone from the rock, which is roughly equal to the volume of 400 Olympic swimming pools. Where it went is unclear, because there is nothing around the caves. No piles of earth, no traces that anything was ever dug here at all. China has a unique feature. Throughout its history, the government has recorded everything in documents. Officials' names, harvests, floods, disputes between neighbors. But for 2,000 years, the chronicles don't mention these caves at all, as if they never existed. And now, here's the most interesting part. The caves were not discovered by a scientist or an expedition with modern equipment and funding. They were discovered by a single man with a water pump whom everyone considered an oddball. And here's something to think about. If under one Chinese village there turned out to be 24 caves that no one knew about for 2,000 years, how many such places around the world are right now waiting for their own oddball? The oldest sundial slab was found in 2011 during the excavation of 5 burial mounds on the border of Dobropilsky and Konstantinovsky districts of the Donetsk region. The slab, which is at least 3,500 years old, is considered by scientists to be a unique find. Its dimensions are 1 meter by 70 centimeters. It weighs 130 kilograms. On both sides, there are images, punched dimples and grooves carved like furrows. Until now, it was believed that the oldest sundials were inventions of ancient Egypt and Babylon. But here, something similar yet more advanced was found in a burial mound near Donetsk. Moreover, it can be stated that the discovered clock is much more advanced than the Egyptian and Babylonian ones, as it allows you to use not only the sun, but also the moon to tell time. Plus, it allows for much greater accuracy by moving the gnomons depending on the time of day and year. This makes it possible to conduct further research, not just as a timekeeping device, but also as a calendar. The over 3,000-year-old slab from the Tavria-Tavria-Din burial ground in Rostov's Neklinovsky district also features holes arranged elliptically. The slab was discovered in 1991 and is currently kept at the Tanais Archaeological Museum Reserve in the Rostov region. The first king of Karakol in the jungles of Belize. For almost 40 years, the archaeologist couple Arlen and Diana Che excavated here, uncovering staircases, markets, and dams until they reached the heart of the Khan complex, the heavenly place. Beneath the thick slabs, they found a narrow passage which led to a chamber painted with cinnabar. On the floor was a skeleton, its shoulders adorned with jade beads. Nearby were 11 painted vessels, carved bone tubes, a mosaic mask, and spondylus shells the color of raw meat. The steles hieroglyphs have always named the city's first ruler as Tekabchak, Hand of Thunder. Now both the texts and their dates match the bone. Only 2 or 3 decades after his ascension in the year 331, it turns out that Karakol was an independent power even before the famous arrival of the envoys from Teotihuacan in 378. He didn't awaken due to outside influence. He was already ruling, trading, and collecting tribute. The items around the body speak for themselves. Jade is a sign of royal blood. Cinnabar is a symbol of power and sacrifice. The spondylus shell indicates long-distance trade through the Caribbean. And the thin bone tubes are attributes of priests who inhaled cocoa powder before rituals. This isn't a random collection, but portraits of the state curated in its founder's personal capsule. For scientists, this is not just a skeleton, but the first chapter of Karakol's history, hidden by vines for almost 1,500 years. Too much evidence. Fall 2024. The Pentagon releases a new report on unidentified phenomena. The table lists 757 incidents in just 1 year. More than half were recorded by military pilots. Strange spheres on radar, dark cubes in transparent shells, objects moving against the wind and suddenly shooting upward. Some cases are explained in the usual way: satellite debris, drones, optics. but about a third fall into the no data for identification category. That means neither speed nor trajectory can really be understood, because the instruments behave as if they're not looking at a physical object. The Ministry of Defense is honest. There are no signs of extraterrestrial origin. But that's exactly the same wording that's been used for 70 years. The problem is the Navy and Air Force often see something, and though cameras and thermal imagers record it, there's no way to capture it clearly. Pilots say, at first you think it's a glitch, then you see a spot on the radar making a 90-degree turn at the speed of a passenger airliner. Such reports used to be kept in safes. Now they're published in open reports, just with the names changed. And it turns out to be strange arithmetic. The more accurate the sensors become, the more often they detect things we don't have a name for. It seems the sky is silent only when we're not looking too closely. Again, the same recipe. Fear, technology, myth. We see it both under the pyramid and on the Pentagon's radar. Ritual rice. In the northern Retidian cave, archaeologists found rice husk imprints on pottery that are at least 3,500 years old. The only traces are a thin starch film and phytoliths, but that's enough to confirm that the settlers reached Guam carrying rice across 2,300 kilometers of open ocean. Fields, terraces, and sickles were never found, which means the grains were preserved not for food, but for ritual, perhaps once a year, to remind the spirits of their ancestors about their distant home in Taiwan. In the hands of the islanders, rice turned from everyday food into a symbol of origin. And that's why tiny traces on pottery turned out to be more important than an entire cemetery of bone harpoons. Tiwanaku's mysterious artifacts. Unfortunately, even before archaeologists reached the pyramids, they were almost destroyed by looters. Many stones from the pyramid were looted for the construction of local houses and churches. Today, steps leading to the top have been preserved on the western slope of Akapana. Various figures are carved on the sides of these steps. Recent studies have shown that this pyramid is essentially an artificial earthen mound that was faced with stone blocks. To the south, not far from Tiwanaku, there's another megalithic complex called Pumapunku, which is a rectangular terraced earthen mound with huge monolithic stone blocks. In particular, the largest stone block in Tiwanaku was found at Pumapunku, which weighs more than 131 tons. Between 300 BC and 300 AD, Tiwanaku was the cultural and religious center of the powerful empire of the same name, where pilgrimages were made. However, the city itself is much older. Based on the archaeological methods of Arthur Poznański, the age of Tiwanaku was originally estimated at 18,000 years, but modern archaeologists in the 21st century tend to believe that it is not actually that ancient. Today, many structures have been excavated in Tiwanaku, including the Temple of Stoneheads, the Kalasasaya Temple, the Gate of the Sun, and the Gate of the Moon. Perhaps the most outstanding structure in Tiwanaku is the Akapana Pyramid, which is 16.5 meters high, 257 meters long, and 197 meters wide. At the top of this pyramid, a cross-shaped pool was constructed, and within its depths lies a complex of zigzagging stone-lined channels. The purpose of these channels, as well as the pyramid itself, is unknown. The haunted Appalachians are a mountain range that is older than Saturn's rings and even the ozone layer. Its rocks were formed 1.2 billion years ago, when the continents were still one whole. This ancient landscape has inspired many legends, making the mountains one of Earth's most mysterious places. Among the dense forests and deep gorges, local residents have told stories for centuries about mysterious creatures. The Mothman, in the Year, in Voronezh, Ampusa, in Voronezh Peresmashka, and the Flatwoods Monsters. That is why today social networks are filled with discussions about mystical phenomena in the Appalachians. Scientists believe that the region's unique topography has contributed to the formation of a rich ecosystem. Ancient forests and swamps, untouched by civilization, remain preserved and retain a pristine wilderness. Folklorists note that in this landscape, it is easy to feel the presence of something ancient and powerful. Myths about mysterious creatures not only frighten, but also serve as a warning. Just like before, stories help people treat the wild with more caution. Perhaps these legends hold something more, a memory of a time when humans were just beginning to understand the world. 3 amazing artifacts. Archaeologists have made a discovery that could change our understanding of the history of ancient Egypt: the lost tomb of Pharaoh. Thutmose II was recently discovered, an event comparable to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. However, unlike the famous tomb of the Golden Boy, the tomb of Thutmose II was found to be heavily damaged. After the pharaoh's death, the chamber was flooded and most of the relics were likely moved to another location. One of the key artifacts is fragments of alabaster vessels decorated with the name of Thutmose II. These vessels, made in the shape of a duck, were used in rituals and indicated the high status of their owner. The inscription on them helped confirm that the tomb really belonged to this pharaoh. Another important find is fragments of paintings that fell from the ceiling and walls. Researchers discovered that the ceiling was once painted blue and covered with stars, while the walls were decorated with text from the Book of Amduat, an ancient Egyptian text describing the journey of the sun god Ra in the afterlife. Such images were found only in the tombs of pharaohs and high-ranking nobles. Another artifact found was a wooden rod, which could have been part of a spear or a ceremonial fan used for fanning the pharaoh. An inscription of the king's title on the shaft provided more evidence that the tomb was Thutmose II's. The oldest Masonic artifact. This brass square is one of the earliest Masonic artifacts in the world. It was found in 1830 under the foundation of Bales Bridge in the Irish city of Limerick. It dates back to 1507, which makes it an important piece of evidence of early Freemasonry. On one side, the words are engraved, "I will strive to live with love and care," and on the other, "according to the level and by the square." These phrases resonate with the key principles of Freemasonry: honesty, justice, and brotherhood. The square and the level are traditional symbols of Freemasons, associated with the righteousness of actions and the equality of people. How this item ended up under the bridge is a mystery. Maybe it was put there as a symbolic cornerstone for good luck during construction. In any case, this is a rare artifact that gives us an idea about the origins of Masonic traditions, as early as the beginning of the 16th century, the mythical gold mine. Here's
Золотой рудник.
In 1929, Australia found its own Indiana Jones, Lewis Harold Bell Lassiter. He claimed that 3 decades earlier, he had discovered a massive gold reef in the very heart of the continent. There was almost no evidence, but rumors of a lost Klondike stirred up prospectors and historians. In 1930, Lassiter managed to organize an expedition and set off into the outback once again. He was accompanied by a pilot, 2 gold prospectors, Aboriginal guides, and even a representative of the governor. However, Lassiter behaved sullenly, got confused in his stories, and was reluctant to show the way. Upon reaching Mount Marjorie, he claimed that they were lost. His companions considered him an imposter and left. Lassiter was left only with a hunter, but soon he abandoned him as well. In the end, Harold continued on alone. A year later, he was found dead in a cave. Judging by his diary, he died of exhaustion, having spent his last months among Aboriginal people trying to survive. Meanwhile, the legend of the reef did not fade. Numerous prospectors combed the McDonnell Range in hopes of finding gold. The press discussed the mysterious Swede, Olaf Johansson, who supposedly also knew the way to the treasure. Later, books and movies appeared. Director Luke Walker, in the Lassiter's Bones Project, found Harold's letters mentioning that very Olaf and hinting at the lost reef. Modern research has not confirmed large deposits in the designated area, although geologist Bill DeCarly came across a quartz seam that resembled Lassiter's description. He believed that Harold was merely retelling other people's stories. Nevertheless, the mystery of the treasure continues to excite the minds of Arctic explorers and gold hunters. A pumpkin from an 800-year-old seed. Archaeological excavations on the territory of the First Nations Menominee Reservation in the American state of Wisconsin led to unexpected results. During the exploration of the area, a tiny clay container was discovered, inside which were pumpkin seeds. This type of squash had long been considered extinct. Analysis showed the seeds were roughly 8 centuries old and could likely yield a harvest. The new species was named Giteosocomi, which literally translates as big old squash. A group of Canadian students conducted a successful experiment growing pumpkins from 800-year-old pumpkin seeds. You can see the result for yourself. The students put in a lot of effort and are now reaping the fruits of their labor. You have to agree, it's not every day that archaeologists get to taste what they've unearthed. The giant refrigerator. After seeing this, any viewer would be convinced that nature itself is taking revenge for human harm. In the 1960s, Soviet workers in Yakutia cleared a section of the taiga to meet the needs of a nearby settlement. However, the trees in these areas served a very important function. Their canopies created shade that prevented the sun from heating the soil. There is permafrost underground here, and for thousands of years it remained untouched. As soon as the trees disappeared, the sun reached the ground. The ice began to melt, the ground subsided, and a small ravine formed. Today, that ravine is called the Batagaika crater. It is 1.5 kilometers long, 115 meters deep, and covers an area of more than 80 hectares. Every year it expands by another 10 to 15 meters and no one can stop it. The locals call it the gateway to the underworld. And if you look at it from the air, it's hard to disagree with that. But scientists are interested in Batagaika for another reason. Permafrost is a perfect natural refrigerator, and the walls of the depression have exposed layers of earth up to 650,000 years old. Animals that lived here during the Ice Age are literally thawing out from these walls. In 2018, they recovered a foal of a prehistoric horse that was 42,000 years old, with preserved dark brown fur, tail, mane, and internal organs. The animal looked as if it had just fallen asleep recently. In 2024, Batagaika presented scientists with the carcass of a 1-year-old mammoth calf with the same incredible preservation. But there is another side to this story. The frozen ground preserved both animals and carbon that had built up for hundreds of thousands of years. Now it's thawing and being released into the atmosphere as methane and carbon dioxide. From Batagaika alone, more than 150,000 tons of carbon have been released over its entire existence. And there are thousands of such places all over the Arctic. They're all melting. And each of them releases gases that accelerate the very warming that melted them in the first place. Climatologists call this a feedback loop. The story of the giant refrigerator Batagaika began when someone cut down a few trees. 70 years later, a hole the size of a small town continues to grow, and scientists still don't know where it will stop. An unknown god of ancient Egypt. Here's a name you probably haven't heard: Pelusius, an ancient Egyptian city on the eastern border of the Nile Delta, Egypt's first line of defense against Eastern invasion, and at the same time, it was a major port city through which everyone passed: Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. Whoever controlled Pelusius controlled the entrance to Egypt. Today, this place is called Tel El Farama, and Egyptian archaeologists have been excavating here for 6 years. Recently, they found a circular temple with a huge pool in the center, 35 meters in diameter. That's about half the size of a football field. The pool was connected by a canal to one of the branches of the Nile, and the water came there on its own, murky and rich in silt. Around the pool, there was a whole network of canals and reservoirs to control the flow of water, and right in the center stood a square platform on which most likely stood a large statue of a deity. To whom was this temple dedicated? To a god named Pelusius. He is so little known that most historians have never heard of him. His name is presumably derived from the Greek word pelos, meaning mud, clay, or silt. So, he is the god of Nile silt, a symbol of fertility and renewal. Every year, the Nile would flood and leave a layer of fertile silt on its banks, without which Egypt simply could not have survived. And for this god, they built a round temple with a living pool that breathed with the river. The architecture of the temple shows traces of several cultures at once: Egyptian layout, Greek proportions, Roman details, which is quite expected for a city at the crossroads of civilization. The temple was used from the 2nd century BC to the 6th century AD, almost 800 years, surviving the transition from the Ptolemies to Rome and from Rome to Byzantium. They found it using a satellite and special equipment that scans the ground like an X-ray and shows what's inside without digging. The scan revealed a large building several meters underground. Then, they made a small test excavation and found brick walls, amulets with images of Egyptian gods, and a scarab with the name of Pharaoh Thutmose III, who lived 1,000 years before this temple was built. but was revered as a saint for a very long time after his death. For almost 800 years, this pool was filled with water from the Nile. People came here to pray, bringing amulets and offerings. Then everything was buried under sand for another 1,500 years until a satellite observed it from above. The second Sphinx of Giza, the eastern edge of the plateau. Everyone knows the stone guardian of the Khafra pyramid, but in ancient texts, Egyptologist Bassam Ash-Sham found a strange duality: the Sphinx, father of fear, and the Sphinx, mother of fear. And here's what comes together. Between the front paws of the current Sphinx stands the stele of Thutmose IV. On it, there are two creatures, not one. A clay tablet found nearby tells about a statue that was struck by lightning and had its head broken. The lightning struck the metal crown. Lightning is attracted to metal. During recent ground-penetrating radar surveys, geophysicists from Cairo University examined the dunes south of the current Sphinx. At a depth of about 4 meters, the instruments detected an elongated, dense outline, almost 60 meters long, matching the size of the surviving monument's body without the head. The signature differs from typical limestone layers, which suggests it is a man-made object. There are several reasons why the find has not been excavated. Firstly, there is a risk of sand collapsing and cracks appearing on the walls of neighboring temples. Secondly, official bodies are concerned about disputes over changing the overall appearance of the plateau. For now, excavation is prohibited. The potential Mother Sphinx remains under the sand, but the complex actually preserves half of the composition intended by its creators. The two sphinxes were carved from a single rock about 10,000 years ago, when the Sahara's climate was humid. Later, one of them lost its head due to a lightning strike. The ruined statue was buried in sand. The superstitious priests didn't dare restore such a bad omen. 1,000 years later, Thutmose IV unearthed and restored the surviving father of fear, but said nothing about the second. Since then, we've only seen half the original idea. And as long as the mysterious shape lies beneath the sand, the history of Giza remains unfinished, like a missing page from the Great Book. Cerro under the wheel, rover Curiosity rolls along the bottom of the old riverbed in the Geddes Valles Canyon. The rocks are just rocks, nothing special. One of the boulders cracks under the wheel of the nearly 1-ton machine, and inside, a pure yellow glow flashes. It's not dust, not salt, but elemental sulfur in crystals. Nothing like this has ever been found on Mars before. Sulfur was only known in the form of sulfates, which are formed when it comes into contact with water. But pure sulfur appears under special, almost home-like conditions. It's as if everything unnecessary was squeezed out of the rock. For science, this is a double gift. First, sulfur is vital in amino acid chains. Without it, there would be no protein on Earth. Secondly, the very fact of its existence breaks previous models of Martian geology. Now, the area where such rocks are found becomes a priority point. We need to drill, observe, and build new climate scenarios. A medieval board game. Large-scale excavations at Viborg Castle near St. Petersburg have been underway since July this year. Several artifacts and a secret room 4 meters deep have already been found. A secret house that may have had an underground passage to the city. Now, a new discovery. A medieval brick with a board for a tabletop logic game, similar to checkers or Go, marked on it. Scientists believe that this marked brick is nothing other than a board for the game mill, which came to Europe from Central Asia in the 9th or 10th century. The English equivalent of this game is Nine Man's Morris. It's something like a military strategy game, where 2 players battle using pieces as warriors. The game uses 9 black and 9 white pieces. The goal is to line up 3 pieces of the same color in a row. The first mention of Viborg Fortress dates back to 1293. Records from the mid-16th century mention a certain secret room with a staircase, that is, a hidden passage from the castle to the city. Recently, archaeologists discovered this secret room, a hidden house that had remained untouched for several hundred years. 1.8 billion rubles have been allocated to excavate and restore Viborg Castle, with work done by specialists from the Institute of the History of Material Culture at the Russian Academy of Sciences. They replaced the alphabet. Quipu is a bundle of ropes with knots. The main thread has dozens of colored strings hanging from it. It was long thought the Incas just used knots to count corn and taxes, like an ancient abacus. A team of linguists and programmers uploaded 21 complete quipus from a museum in Peru into a neural network. The algorithm analyzed the color of the rope, how far it hung from the main cord, which specific knots were tied, and in what order. The machine quickly found repeating combinations, like identical words in a long text. It turned out that the same set of knots on the yellow rope appeared next to records about grain storage, while another set on the red rope was linked with lists of warriors. Scientists compared this with colonial Spanish documents and realized that the quipu conveyed meaning much richer than simple counting. For example, a green rope plus 3 short knots almost always marks a place for storing corn, while red plus a double knot can mean a tax for the army. If the method is confirmed on a large number of samples, the quipu will stop being seen as a simple counting device and will be recognized as a true writing system. Then the Incas will have to be moved from the list of civilizations without letters to the list of peoples who simply chose a different rope-based alphabet. Excavations in the desert dunes. Archaeologists discovered Paleolithic sites and artifacts about 1.5 million years old in the desert in western Iraq. Among the finds are hand axes and stone tools, shedding light on the early history of the region and ancient human activity. The research was conducted in the Al-Shabaka area, where geoarchaeologist Ella Ekbers and her team studied ancient soil layers and traces of human activity. They identified 7 sites over an area of 10 by 20 kilometers, as well as more than 850 artifacts, including early Paleolithic stone axes. There used to be a large lake here, which left behind a dried-up riverbed. Ancient people probably used this region for hunting and making tools. Scientists believe that further research will help us better understand how the landscape changed and which groups of people inhabited it in ancient times. Iraqi students who studied geoarchaeology and the Paleolithic period also took part in the project. Despite the unstable political situation, the work went smoothly without any incidents. In the future, Ekbers plans to expand the research to reconstruct climate changes and early human activity in the region. A gold ring in the shape of an oil lamp. Excavations in the ancient Egyptian city of Canopus are bringing new surprises in the form of unusual artifacts. Underwater archaeologists led by Franco Gazia came across this unique gold ring. A great many gold treasures have been found, but no one remembers seeing a ring like this in the shape of an oil lamp. Scientists were unable to draw any parallels regarding the origin of this artifact, but there are still a few clues. The ring itself is crafted with great skill. The lower part of the band has a carved shape featuring leaves and a twisted tendril. The upper part is shaped like an oil lamp. Nothing like this has ever been seen before. Not only does the location connect this artifact to Egypt, but also the oil lamp-shaped bezel, since oil lamps played an important role at Christian pilgrimage shrines around the world. The place where the ring was found most likely belonged to the pilgrimage shrine of Kir and Ion. Here, oil was of great importance. Sophrony, a visitor to the shrine, wrote about this, and later so did the patriarchs of Jerusalem. He claimed that oil lamps were suspended from the ceiling above the tombs of the saints, and that the oil from these lamps was used as medicine to treat the sick. During the excavations in Canopus, numerous items were discovered indicating the activity of a workshop. For example, pieces of gold leaf, short lengths of wire, undrilled beads, and ingots. As is known from the Coptic miracles of St. Mina, a workshop for making gold jewelry was attached to the pilgrimage shrine of Kir and Ion. It can be assumed that the gold workshop existed at the end of the 6th century. Accordingly, this can be considered the date of the ring's creation. The ring was probably created as a souvenir for pilgrims. It could be filled with oil from this holy place and taken home. To keep the oil inside the miniature lamp, it was sealed with beeswax. This could also have been in the textbooks. Imagine you're an Egyptologist. You've spent your whole life studying ancient Egypt. You've written a dissertation. You teach courses at the university. You've published several books. And one fine day, new results of soil analysis under the Sphinx land on your desk. There are traces of water erosion, very deep ones, the kind that only happens after centuries of heavy rains. The last time such rains occurred in Egypt was 10 to 12,000 years ago. That means if it's true, the Sphinx is 2 or 3 times older than everything we know about Egyptian civilization. So what are you going to do with that? Most Egyptologists did exactly what you would probably do in their place. They explained that it was a mistake, or that it was the wrong type of stone. Because to admit that the Sphinx is not from 2500 BC, but at least from the 10th millennium, means admitting that there was an advanced civilization we know nothing about. That's not a small correction in a textbook. That's a complete revision of all human history from scratch. And it's no wonder that nobody wants such changes. Geologist Robert Schoch, who first described this water erosion in the 1990s, is still publishing and has yet to receive a single clear refutation. Only a condescending comment that he doesn't understand the specifics of the Egyptian climate. He's now over 60. I wonder if he'll receive recognition during his lifetime. The history of science suggests there's a chance, but sometimes you have to wait a very long time. In the meantime, let's turn to what has already been definitely confirmed. At the same time, the Egyptian authorities did not allow independent research under the Sphinx for a long time. Why? There is no official explanation. What's under it? No one knows. Seismic studies in the 1990s showed possible voids at the base. There are voids there. What's inside them? No one has checked. The African continent is splitting apart. Scientists have found that Africa will split into two continents much faster than previously thought. In 2005, a 56.5-kilometer-long crack appeared in the Ethiopian desert, which continues to widen at a rate of 1.5 centimeters per year. This is part of a large-scale process connected to the East African Rift Valley, a giant fault stretching 3,200 kilometers, which formed 22 million years ago. It was once thought Africa would split apart in tens of millions of years, but Professor Ken McDonald from the University of California predicts that this will happen in just 1.5 million years. As a result, the Indian Ocean will flood East Africa, forming a new continent that will include Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and half of Ethiopia. The Great Lakes of Africa, which contain 25% of the Earth's fresh water, were formed precisely because of the tectonic rift. According to former NASA consultant Alexander Doughton, these processes are ongoing, and over time, East Africa will completely separate, forming a new ocean. Over time, satellite data and seismic scanning confirmed that volcanic activity in the region is increasing. In 2018, heavy rains led to the formation of new cracks in Kenya, and local residents felt underground tremors. Experts also believe that Madagascar will eventually split into two islands. Although these changes are imperceptible on the scale of a human lifetime, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions will become more frequent, marking the birth of a new continent. Ant-Man skull, Catamarca, Argentina. Builders were digging a trench for a water pipe and came across a series of burial urns. In one of them, they discovered a human skull of a very strange shape, which the local press dubbed the head of an ant-man. The shape, though, is hard to call ordinary. The forehead juts forward, the crown stretches back, and the skull appears squeezed in a vice. Naturally, people first thought of aliens and genetics, but archaeologists quickly cooled things down. Between the 3rd and 12th centuries, the Kuliki, Sianaga, and Aguada cultures lived in these lands, and they practiced artificial cranial deformation. The process was simple. They wrapped the infant's head with cloth and fixed it between wooden boards. The soft bones gradually changed shape. Of course, you might ask, why? It's simple: beauty, belonging to a group, social status. Just like today with tattoos or body modifications. It's worth noting that there's almost no evidence of health damage from such practices. A child's skull is flexible. The brain grows, filling the available space. That's why most deformed skulls don't show signs of trauma or developmental delay. There's also an alternative explanation: hydrocephalus, which is a buildup of fluid. Heidi Dawson Hobbies pointed to this. But in that case, we would expect other changes: thinner bones, asymmetry. This skull is a good example of why such finds shouldn't be immediately classified as historical anomalies. Sometimes a strange shape isn't a message from aliens, but a very human desire to look like your own kind. The remains of a human over 1 million years old. Archaeologists have discovered unique remains of an ancient human in the Spanish cave Cima del Elefante, who lived about 1,400,000 years ago. The discovered skull fragment is the oldest ever found in Western Europe and represents a previously unknown human species to science. The discovered part of the face, nicknamed Pink by scientists after the band Pink Floyd, preserved the left cheek and upper jaw with teeth. According to experts, this ancient human was very different from the later inhabitants of the region, known as Homo antecessor. For example, Pink had a flatter nose shape, more reminiscent of Homo erectus, the first species to leave Africa about 1,800,000 years ago. At that time, the climate of Europe was much milder, and the valleys in the Cima del Elefante area were covered with dense forests and inhabited by hippos, bison, and deer. A bracelet that shouldn't exist. In 2008, fragments of a bracelet were found in Denisova Cave in the Altai. Denisova Cave is a place in the Altai Mountains in Siberia, where several tens of thousands of years ago, the paths of 3 different types of humans crossed at the same time: Denisovans, Neanderthals, and our direct ancestors. Imagine 3 different types of humans living in the same region. Sometimes they meet, sometimes they fight, sometimes they have children together. It sounds like the plot of a science fiction novel or a video game. But this is not fiction or make-believe. This is literally what happened in the Altai many years ago. They lived side by side, sometimes fought, sometimes traded, and even had children together. All of this has been proven by DNA analysis of real samples. Science has done what once seemed impossible. It has reconstructed the relationships between different human species. In 2010, scientists compared the DNA of modern humans with the DNA extracted from Denisovan and Neanderthal bones for the first time. And they discovered that these sequences are present in the genomes of living people right now. You yourself quite likely carry a few % of Neanderthal DNA. This is not a metaphor or a poetic image. This is literally a fact that can be verified by taking a test at the nearest genetic laboratory. We are not just studying these people from afar. In the most literal sense, we are their descendants, with fragments of their DNA living inside us right now. Some people living today carry a few % of Denisovan DNA within them, and they simply don't know it. The bracelet belonged to the Denisovans themselves. The green from chlorite is a semi-precious mineral with a greenish tint that had to be found, extracted, and processed. It was polished so well that on a sunny day it reflects light, and by a nighttime campfire, it glows with a deep emerald color. It's a beautiful item. The find is 50,000 years old. That's already incredible in itself. At school, we were told that the Stone Age was all about clubs and caves. But here we see an ornament. This is already aesthetics, which shows that the Denisovan wanted to look beautiful. It's a need that, for some reason, we tend to consider purely modern. But when scientists looked at the hole in the bracelet under a microscope, the story became completely different. The hole was drilled, perfectly even with smooth walls. Imagine you're trying to drill through hard stone without any metal tools. All you have is another stone, bone, or wood. You work with your hands, rotating the tool manually, trying to keep a constant speed. You'll end up with something uneven, with jagged edges and deviations. It's impossible to keep the speed and direction constant by hand. But here we see perfectly smooth holes. That's exactly what amazes researchers. If you drilled this by hand, the walls of the hole would be uneven, with characteristic scratches and deviations. That's not the case here. The walls are smooth, as if a machine was used. Officially, this technology appeared among humans in the Neolithic era, about 12,000 years ago. The bracelet is 4 times older than that. Imagine handing a smartphone to a medieval blacksmith and telling him it was made in the year 800. That's about how the scientists felt. The head of the excavation, Anatoly Derivienko, described the technique briefly. The ancient craftsman had techniques not previously associated with the Paleolithic era. His colleague Mikhail Shunkov said directly, "The Denisovans were technologically more advanced than Homo sapiens and Neanderthals of the same period." A bold statement, but he has the bracelet in his hands. And so far, there is no other explanation for it. Of course, there were skeptics. The bracelet could have ended up in this layer from more recent deposits. Additional research was conducted. Oxygen isotope analysis showed that the layer was undisturbed. The bracelet had been there since the time of the Denisovans. Now, scientists from Russia, Britain, and Australia are re-examining all the dating. There is new evidence that the age could be even greater, up to 65,000 years. If this is confirmed, explaining the origin of this bracelet will be even more difficult. That's what still worries and troubles me. From an entire species of people who lived on Earth for tens of thousands of years, only a few teeth, a fragment of a pinky finger, and this bracelet remain, which reflects the sun in bright light and shouldn't exist. I'm sure there is still so much we don't know about our past, and especially about the creatures that were very much like us. They lived here for tens of thousands of years. They built, they thought, they wanted to be beautiful, and all that's left of it is a single green bracelet. The treasures of the Alans, the southern outskirts of the Chechen village of Alkan-Kala. It has long been listed in the archaeological register, but the excavations of 2025 sharply increased interest. At the bottom of a narrow tomb, carefully lined with stone, a pendant flashed, a thin gold ring with 5-faceted almandine inlays. A little to the right lay a glass bowl the color of a melting glacier. The chemical composition confirmed Byzantine or Persian origin. Among the horse's bones, bronze salia were found, and along the warrior's legs, a knife and sheath with stylized griffins, typical of Sasanian art. The burial is dated to the late 9th century. This was the time when Alania controlled the passes between the Black Sea and the Caspian. The richness of the grave goods indicates that we are looking at a person from the top of society, possibly a representative of the rulers of Dorial. But the jeweler's technique suggests that the pendant was made locally. The gold has a typical platinum admixture from Caspian alluvial deposits, and the granulation uses an adhesive composition seen in Pakar finds. Taken together, the tomb has destroyed the old image of the nomads as intermediaries. Alan society at the end of the first millennium appeared more complex. Their own jewelers, long-distance trade in glass and close ties with Iran and Byzantium. Most importantly, the wish to immortalize status in gold in Japanese icon-style harnesses. The Trilithon in Baalbek, in the foundation of the Temple of Jupiter, there are 3 huge stone blocks that still amaze even experienced archaeologists. They are called the Trilithon. Imagine the scale. Each of these blocks weighs almost 800 tons, and their size is impressive. Approximately 19 meters long, just over 4 meters high, and about 3.6 meters wide. Even today, lifting and moving such gigantic stones would not be easy, and the ancient builders didn't have cranes or special equipment at their disposal. It is still not entirely clear how exactly these gigantic stones were transported and put in place. It is believed that the stone blocks were moved on special wooden sledges, using logs and hundreds of workers. Some have even suggested their involvement in the construction of the temples, but serious scholars reject such hypotheses. The Trilithon is more than the temple's foundation. It clearly shows the advanced engineering knowledge of ancient civilizations. Perhaps future discoveries will help unravel the mystery of how such massive structures appeared in antiquity. The ruins of the largest church in medieval Nubia. Polish archaeologists have discovered the ruins of a church that, by all indications, is the largest church in medieval Nubia. The ruins of the church were discovered in the city of Dongola. Archaeological excavations have been ongoing there since 1965. However, after some time, they were suspended. It was only in 2018, thanks to a grant from the European Research Council, that they were resumed. Since excavations began, archaeologists have found many artifacts which were sent to the National Museum in Warsaw. The scientists were sure that they had discovered and excavated everything they could there. There shouldn't have been any new findings or data about this city. But that didn't stop the Polish archaeologists. They managed to make a new, unique discovery that could make scientists look at not only the city itself in a new way, but also at the history of the Nubian church. They excavated the apse wall along with the adjacent wall of the brick temple. They also managed to discover and excavate the dome of a tomb located right in the center of the city. The apse walls, among the church's most sacred areas, were adorned with 2 rows of monumental figures. The diameter of the apse is about 6 meters, and the width of the church next to it is approximately 27 meters. According to scholars, this apse is the largest one discovered in Nubia to date. Scientists suggest that the discovered church could have been a cathedral, next to which a necropolis was built for church officials, most likely for local bishops. In any case, the scientists have a lot of work ahead of them before they can find answers to the questions that interest them. Hollywood in the Clay Fortress. This place is worthy of a fairy tale like the tales of 1001 Nights. It's so cinematic that you can see why Hollywood just couldn't pass it by. This place is in Morocco, and it's called Eight Ben Haddou. Out of the shimmering haze above the scorching desert, on the southern slopes of the high Atlas, rise red towers made of clay and straw. They pile up on top of each other behind fortified walls, casting long shadows on the yellow wall. It looks like a set from a fantasy movie. In fact, it actually became one. Eight Ben Haddou was an important trading hub through which gold, salt, and all other goods passed between the Sahara and Marrakesh. When trans-Saharan trade declined in the 16th century, most of the residents moved to a nearby village on the other side of the river, and the old fortress began to slowly fall apart. This continued for several centuries, until David Lean came here to film Lawrence of Arabia in 1962. He was so impressed by the place that he personally financed the restoration of several crumbling houses. After him, Gladiator, Alexander, The Mummy, and The Last Temptation of Christ were filmed here. And in 2011, the Game of Thrones crew turned Eight Ben Haddou into Astapor, the city of the Unsullied. Today, a few families still live inside the old fortress, refusing to move out, even though the clay walls require constant repairs. Tourists come here from all over the world. Tour guides talk about Game of Thrones, while the locals go about their business just as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. The site is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List, and this at least helps to preserve its history. The burial of celestial guests. In 1901, an expedition of British archaeologists led by Lord Williams Campbell conducted excavations in one of the ancient tombs in the desert near the Pyramid of Giza. When they opened the massive sarcophagus, the researchers made a sensational discovery. Inside was a mummy that was significantly different from all known remains of ancient Egypt. The creature's height exceeded 2.5 meters, and its skull was unusually elongated and narrow, resembling the depictions of gods on the walls of Egyptian temples. The bones were much denser than human bones, and their structure suggested greater strength, as if built for different conditions. The strangest thing was that there were no traces of embalming or autopsy on the body, yet it was perfectly preserved, as if it had been in stasis. On the sarcophagus, archaeologists found engravings that mentioned a messenger from the stars who arrived during the time of the pharaohs. The hieroglyphs hinted at beings who descended from the sky and taught the ancient Egyptians architecture and astronomy. Some of the symbols resembled star maps, and on the inner walls of the tomb, there were images of flying disc-shaped objects. This discovery gave rise to many theories, ranging from alternative histories about Egypt's connection with extraterrestrial civilizations to speculation about a lost chapter in human history. However, shortly after the excavation, the artifact disappeared without a trace. It was sent to a private collection, and mentions of it were quickly erased from official reports. Meteorites help win lotteries. In 2015, a bright meteor streaked across the sky over Ticonderoga, lighting up the sky with green and orange flashes. Rumors have since spread that its fragments are scattered nearby. In fact, meteors have visited Thailand more than once in recent years, leaving behind black stones that people believe have magical powers. The most famous story comes from Phathalone province. A married couple from Sirapu Vadon discovered strange boulders weighing up to 20 kilograms in a palm plantation. At night, lightning struck the garden, and in the morning the couple saw burning pits with mysterious fragments inside them. After bringing the gift from the sky home, they soon felt a surge of energy and noticed that they argued less. Curious neighbors noticed unusual patterns on the surface of the stones, taking them for lucky lottery numbers. In Thailand, this is a popular pastime. Although they didn't win big, their belief in the special properties only grew stronger. Now, people often come to the owners to absorb cosmic energy, and some are even thinking about making money from such relics. This cult of celestial stones shows how natural phenomena can turn into a mystical phenomenon, reflecting the longing for miracles and the desire to be part of the mysteries of the cosmos. The matriarchy of Çatalhöyük looked like a chaotic hive of clay houses, but DNA analysis of 131 skeletons put everything in its place. Relatives were buried under neighboring homes strictly along the maternal line, grandmother, mother, and daughter, either in one grave or two adjoining rooms. Men, on the other hand, were placed without a clear pattern. It turns out that the center of social organization in this Neolithic city was women, and blood was passed down through the female line. The gifts are especially telling. Tiny beads made of shells, lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan, miniature figurines of the mother goddess. All of these are given not to adults but to infant girls. The grave goods seem to foreshadow the girl's future role as mistress of the house, while boys receive a minimum of ornaments. Even the layout of the neighborhoods hints at a female axis. The houses are grouped in clusters of 3 around hearths, where the walls are decorated with hunting scenes. But the central place is occupied by female silhouettes with emphasized hips, a symbol of abundance. Çatalhöyük has often been called egalitarian, since everyone had the same type of dwelling, which supposedly means equality. Genetics reveals a nuance. Yes, there were almost no social classes, but real power lay in kinship ties, and they were ruled by the maternal clan. Ancient Egyptian bread, estimated to be 3,369 to 3,406 years old, was found in the tomb of an architect who served Pharaoh Amenhotep III. This bread is an amazing example of food preservation thanks to the advanced mummification technologies used by the ancient Egyptians. The Egyptians mummified not only bodies but also food, which was believed to be used by the deceased in the afterlife. The process involved treating the food with salt, slow drying, wrapping, and coating it with resin to protect it from decay. The discovered loaves have traces of characteristic texture and shape, which confirms their origin and role in ritual ceremonies. Bread is both a symbolic and practical element in preparation for the afterlife, reflecting the Egyptians' deep belief that in the afterlife they would need everything they had in their earthly life. The first common pan-European currency. Researchers from Leiden University wondered, why do the vast majority of rings and bracelets that have come down to us from the Bronze Age look so similar to each other, not only in shape, but also in weight? Could it be that they were used as a single currency? The shape and weight of other items, such as bracelets, curved rib ingots, and even axe blades, also turned out to be standardized, and the objects themselves seem to be made according to a single template. Moreover, they are often found stored in large quantities. It is logical to assume that such items could have served as cash 5,000 years ago. The photo shows a map of hoards where deposits of identical rings, ribs, and axe blades were found. A black circle marks hoards with rings and ribs, a red triangle marks hoards with axe blades, and a blue square marks mixed hoards. The photo shows axe blades and ribs found together in a hoard in Viglini, which were possibly used as currency. New discoveries in Egypt. Since we're in Egypt, here's another story, and it's important not so much because of what was found, but because of how it was found. Buto, or Tel El Farama, is the hill of the pharaohs in the northern Nile Delta. It's a place with a 6,000-year history. This was one of the main religious centers of pre-dynastic Egypt. Here, they worshiped the cobra goddess Wadjet, the patroness of Lower Egypt, that very cobra which the pharaoh wore on his crown. The problem with Buto is that it's almost impossible to excavate this place using conventional methods. Over 6,000 years, new buildings were constructed on top of the old ones. It turned into a layered cake of cultural deposits, saturated with groundwater. And sticking a shovel in means you don't know which layer you'll hit or what you might destroy. Egyptian scientists decided not to dig blindly. First, they wanted to see what was actually there. They used satellites and special equipment that scans the ground like an X-ray and reveals hidden objects without disturbing the soil. The image turned out clear. At a depth of several meters, there is a building about 25 by 25 meters in size. Then they made a small test excavation in one specific spot and saw exactly what they expected: brick walls, amulets, and ritual objects. Based on the finds, the building was dated to around the 7th century BC. The key point isn't the discovery itself, but that it's now possible to map everything under Buto before even touching the ground. We don't dig and then look, we look first and then decide where to dig. And this changes everything because there are thousands of such places under the Nile Delta, most of which are being destroyed right now by rising groundwater and construction. A singing temple underground. Imagine going down 3 floors beneath the Maltese ground into the Hal Saflieni Hall. The corridors were carved out 5,000 years ago, but the main magic is in the oracle hall. A whisper turns into a hum, and a low male voice at a frequency of about 111 Hz makes the walls vibrate so much that your chest trembles. Scientists have checked it. It's the perfect resonance of the human body. After 90 seconds, it feels like the sound comes from inside your bones. In the fall of 2024, Italian acousticians scanned the temple with a laser scanner and found another cavity behind a blocked passage. It also resonates at the same 111 Hz. It turns out that the ancient craftsmen deliberately carved out a whole chain of sound chambers. The priest utters a single word, and vibrations would roll through the entire hypogum, putting those present into a light trance. For the ritual, no better technology is needed. They haven't cleared the chamber yet due to fears of collapsing the vaults, but plan to send in a thin microphone probe. If anything is found there besides stone, like figurines, vessels, or maybe bones, it will become clear that this was not just a crypt, but a laboratory of ancient sound. For now, beneath a quiet tourist street, the oldest speaker on the planet lives, built 5,000 years ago and still working without a single crack. There's only one question. How could people 5,000 years ago calculate the acoustics they needed in the cave so precisely? Tutankhamun's ship, inside tomb, KV-62 among golden masks and thrones, there was an object that Egyptologists immediately called a yacht for eternity. In front of you is an alabaster ship, a box just a bit longer than a palm. The hull is curved like a crescent moon. The bow and stern are the heads of mountain goats with inlaid horns. On the deck sits a small temple with columns, papyruses, and mini shrines. Believers say this is where the young pharaoh's cot rested. The material is Egyptian calcite alabaster, transparent like melted honey. Under the lantern's rays, the light passes through and the whole structure seems to be illuminated from within. Details are pinned, and thin design lines are filled with resin and pigment to ensure the pattern remains visible even in the tomb's darkness. On the sides are cartouches of Tutankhamun, guarded by the symbols of Anubis and Horus. Why would such a luxurious little boat be needed? The Egyptians believed that after death, the pharaoh boards the solar boat and sails across the dark waters of the underworld to rise again in the east together with Ra. And the alabaster model is a pocket-sized copy of this boat. It's a kind of ticket for the afterlife cruise. The stone is durable. The box has survived for 3,000 years. Sand and attempts by robbers have hardly dulled it. In the Cairo Museum, it still looks like a toy liner, ready to set off into eternity. The treasure of coins of the Bosporan kings. During excavations conducted by the Institute of Archaeology of the Russian Academy of Sciences, a hoard of 80 copper staters was discovered. The find dates back to the 6th century AD and belongs to the period of the Bosporan kings' rule. Archaeologists are excavating the Byzantine layer in the ancient city of Phanagoria for the 3rd season. The coins were found in an old broken amphora, placed in a small pit and slightly covered with earth. Scientists say the stash's location suggests unusual circumstances forced the owner to hide the coins. Most likely the reason was a sudden enemy attack, presumably by the Turks or possibly the Huns. The fact that the coins have survived in this condition to this day suggests that the person who buried them was unable to return for them. Most likely his fate was tragic, and this discovery shows how large-scale events like the conquest of a region affect the lives of individual people. A hoard of gold jewelry. While exploring the Karnak temple complex in Luxor, archaeologists discovered an ancient vessel filled with gold jewelry, beads, and figurines of Egyptian gods. According to experts, the find dates back to the 26th dynasty of Egypt and is about 2,600 years old. Jewelry in ancient Egypt was not just a luxury item, it was considered a magical amulet that protected its owner from evil and disease. They played an important role not only in life but also in the afterlife, providing protection for eternity. Among the artifacts, statuettes of the god Amun, the goddess Mut, and their son Khonsu stand out in particular. They were probably used as amulets and worn around the neck. Amun was considered the king of the gods and the patron of pharaohs, and later he merged with Ra, becoming the embodiment of both the visible and invisible deity. All the discovered items will be restored and possibly displayed in the Luxor Museum. The Sistine Chapel of ancient Egypt. Before you is one of the most stunning tombs of ancient Egypt, the burial place of Queen Nefertari. wife of Ramses II. It is already more than 3,200 years old, and it is often called the Sistine Chapel of Egypt because of its incredible paintings. Unlike many other tombs, this one impresses not only with its scale, but also with its bright, almost untouched colors. On the walls, there are scenes from the Book of the Dead, images of gods, and Nefertari herself walking into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that such paintings would help the deceased pass the trials and achieve eternal life. The detailing is stunning. Fine lines, intricate patterns, and vibrant colors. All of this makes the tomb a true masterpiece. Unfortunately, many sections of the walls have been damaged by time, but restorers have managed to preserve its grandeur. Today, this tomb is considered one of the most beautiful in the Valley of the Queens, and a true window into the world of ancient Egyptian art. It existed. Until recently, scientists believed that the grand project of building the capital of Osirian, Dur-Sharrukin, was left half-finished after the death of King Sargon II. However, new geophysical studies prove the opposite. The city was completed and was actively functioning. Archaeologists used the magnetometry method, which made it possible to discover the remains of an impressive 127-room villa, probable royal gardens, and water gates, as well as other large structures. All these discoveries indicate that outside the main palace, Kharsabad was a thriving center. Conceived by Sargon II himself in 713 BC as Sargon's fortress, the city did not fade into oblivion after his death. New data contradict the long-held belief about an unfinished project and reveal the hidden life of the ancient capital. Work resumed in 2017 after the area was liberated from ISIS. Under the guidance of the French archaeological mission, specialists used a high-precision magnetometer, which allows underground structures to be visualized without expensive excavations. It turned out that Kharsabad, contrary to long-standing doubts, served as a full-fledged capital of Assyria. And now modern discoveries shed even more light on the scale and wealth of the ancient empire. A drawing that can be seen from the sea. Everyone knows about the Nazca Lines, but few people know that about 200 kilometers northwest of them, on the slope of a hill in the Pisco Bay, there is a figure called the Paracas Candelabra. And unlike the Nazca Lines, you don't need to see it from a plane. It can be seen from the sea from a distance of 20 kilometers. The figure is 181 meters tall. The drawing is carved into the ground to a depth of 60 centimeters and is lined with stones along the edges. Its shape resembles a trident with 3 prongs, which is where its name comes from. Some researchers see it as the staff of the god Viracocha, a mythological figure from South America associated with lightning and the creation of the world. Others say it is a cactus. Others believe these are plants that local shamans used in rituals. One researcher with a vivid imagination suggested that the drawing served as a navigational sign for sailors who traveled to California for ritual plants and used it to find their way home. There is exactly as much evidence for this version as for any other, which is to say none. Some researchers found a mention of the Paracas Candelabra in the ancient Indian epic Ramayana, written more than 2,000 years ago. It says that the army, which set out east from India, was to keep going until they saw a pillar of a 3-leafed palm, visible from the sea, an eastern landmark set up by celestial beings. Whether this is a coincidence or not, you decide, but if it really is about the Paracas Candelabra, it turns out that people on the other side of the planet knew about it 2,000 years ago. Ceramics dated to around 200 BC were found near the candelabra, most likely left by the people of the Paracas culture. But there is still no direct evidence that they were the ones who created the candelabra. Another mystery is that the drawing has hardly changed over thousands of years, even though it is not located in a dry desert like the Nazca Lines, but on a humid coast with fog and ocean winds. No one knows why it has been so well preserved. A scandal that hasn't ended. The last story for today is honestly the most uncomfortable one, not because the facts are ambiguous, but because it doesn't have a good ending. It doesn't end with science recognizing it or the truth prevailing. It ends with an ellipsis, Mount Gunung Padang in West Java, Indonesia. The locals have considered it sacred for centuries. They pass down from generation to generation that there is something important here. At the top, there are rows of basalt columns. The official version is that it's volcanic rock. Nature can create regular shapes. Nothing special. In 2023, a group of Indonesian geophysicists conducted radar scanning of the mountain. It's kind of like an X-ray, but for the ground. And beneath the surface, they found man-made structures, several layers of construction. The deepest one is dated to about 25,000 years ago. That's twice as old as Göbekli Tepe and 5 times older than the pyramids. If this is true, it would be the oldest man-made structure in human history. They published this in a reputable journal. After that, a scandal broke out. Other scientists picked the article apart. They found real problems with the methodology. Some of the man-made structures are most likely of natural origin. The samples for dating could have been contaminated. In 2024, the journal retracted the article. And what's interesting here is not that the article was retracted, but what happened next. The mountain didn't go anywhere. Excavations are ongoing. New independent teams continue to record anomalies beneath the surface. No one mentions the figure of 25,000 years anymore. But there is something there. My honest position is this. I don't know what's under that mountain. Maybe the first team was wrong. It happens. That's what science is about. Maybe there really is something incredible there, and we just can't prove it for sure yet. But here's what I do know for certain. After the article was retracted, there were significantly fewer people willing to seriously study this place because of their reputations, because of their careers, because nobody wants to be the scientist who believed in the Indonesian pyramid. And because of this, because of the human fear of making a mistake, a potentially crucial place in human history just lies there, waiting. The mountain will wait. It's in no hurry at all. And you know what gets me most? Locals have said for centuries, this mountain is special, passing down this knowledge through generations. Just like the people of Bloxham passed down the story about the tunnels. Just like Gedron talked about it for 30 years. Maybe this is the biggest lesson of all. People who live next to something sometimes know more about it than scientists who come for a week with their equipment. In the next video, there will be a few more stories like this, which official science prefers not to talk about openly. There will be something that will make your hair stand on end. I promise. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and be sure to turn on notifications. Otherwise, YouTube simply won't show you the next video. And write in the comments which of the 9 stories today impressed you the most.